Everyone talks about the views from the Coast Starlight, but almost nobody talks about what it unlocks. National parks, ranger-led programs, and bucket list side trips you can reach without ever renting a car. Before we talk about hidden trips and national parks, let's remind ourselves what the Coast Starlight actually is. This isn't just a regional train. It's a 1,300-plus mile run from Los Angeles all the way up to Seattle, linking some of the biggest cities on the West Coast with long stretches of ocean, forest, and mountains in between. Think of it as a steel rail highway, a spine that runs up the entire coast. You can ride it straight through for the classic one-night epic, or you can hop off at key points and use it as the backbone for a much bigger adventure. Along this route, you've got stations that aren't just dots on a timetable. They're jumping-off points. Places where you can step off the train and be within striking distance of national parks, park-style landscapes, and ranger-led programs without ever having to do a giant West Coast road trip. In the next section, I'll show you one of the most powerful examples of that. How a simple stop at Klamath Falls can turn your Coast Starlight ride into a Crater Lake National Park trip. Let's talk about how this actually works in real life. Because Crater Lake isn't right next to the tracks, but it is very doable if you plan for it. From Klamath Falls, you're looking at roughly 60 miles, about 97 kilometers to reach the rim of Crater Lake, and that's usually around an hour and 20 minutes of driving each way in normal conditions. On the Coast Starlight timetable, Klamath Falls tends to be a late evening or even late night stop, which means this is not a quick step off and back on move. The realistic play is, ride the train into Klamath Falls, overnight in town, then use the next day as your dedicated Crater Lake day before rejoining the Coast Starlight on a later departure. You've got two main options once you're here. If you're comfortable driving, you can grab a rental car in Klamath Falls and do a DIY day trip. Up to the rim for viewpoints, a few short hikes, and back to town in the evening. Local guides see this as a very manageable one-day loop. If you don't want to drive, there are seasonal shuttle and tour options that cater to visitors arriving without cars. For example, a morning shuttle from Klamath Falls to Crater Lake, plus an optional guided trolley tour around the rim with big windows, live narration, and multiple scenic stops, where the shuttle has been listed around $30 round trip in past seasons and the rim trolley ticket is an additional cost. Those tours usually include transport around the rim and a guide explaining the geology and history, but they don't normally include your park entrance fee, food, or any boat tours on the lake, so you'll want to budget those separately. The catch is that this is a summer play. Crater Lake's full access and most tours really line up with the July through September window, when roads are clear, viewpoints are open, and services like shuttles and trolleys are actually running. So, the move I'd recommend is, use the Coast Starlight to get you to Klamath Falls. Plan at least one, ideally 2 nights off the train. Hit Crater Lake on a summer day with either a rental car or a guided shuttle plus trolley setup, and then hop back on the Coast Starlight for the next leg of your West Coast rail adventure. In the description, I'll link to the park's official site, at least one Klamath Falls to Crater Lake tour operator, and a local planning guide so you can check current prices and dates before you book. Since you're already stepping off the Coast Starlight in Klamath Falls, I'd treat this as more than just a place to crash. Think of it as a reset day between long hours on the train and a big national park. For rail fans, there are a couple of easy wins right in town. You've got an old Southern Pacific steam locomotive on static display here. A nice nod to the era when this whole region ran on steam, and a good spot to grab a few rail history shots before or after Crater Lake. The engine is number 2579. A 280 built in 1906 that spent about 50 years hauling freight in this region before retiring here in Veterans Memorial Park, which is within walking distance of the station. If you want to stretch your legs, head out to Moore Park on the shores of Upper Klamath Lake, though you will need a ride or rental car for this one. There are lakeside trails, viewpoints, and enough open sky that sunrise and sunset can look pretty spectacular. After a night arrival on the Coast Starlight, waking up and actually seeing where you've landed, lake, mountains, and big skies, helps the whole trip feel bigger than just steel and sleepers. If you prefer to stay within walking distance, the Favell Museum downtown packs in a serious collection of Native American artifacts in Western art. It's the kind of place you can wander for an hour or two, and get a sense of the people who were here long before there were tracks and timetables. And if you're the type who likes finding rail stories everywhere, Klamath itself is part of that. A working railroad town on the edge of high desert and forest, with a little downtown, some older buildings, a couple of cafes and breweries, just enough texture to make your overnight feel like a real stop, not just a layover. So, my ideal Coast Starlight plus Crater Lake plan is night arrival in Klamath Falls, slow morning with a walk by the lake or a quick steam engine, and museum stop, full Crater Lake day trip, then back into town for one more sleep before you hop back on the Coast Starlight and continue up or down the coast. You don't actually have to get off the train to start your national park experience. On certain stretches of the Coast Starlight, the parks quite literally come to you. Amtrak partners with the National Park Service on a program called Trails and Rails, where volunteer park guides ride on board specific trains and narrate what you're seeing outside the window. On the Coast Starlight, that's offered on select segments and dates. Historically between cities like Seattle and Portland and on portions of the route farther south in California. On those departures, you can head to the observation car and find uniformed volunteers with maps and photos, talking about the landscapes, wildlife, and history you're rolling past. They'll point out rivers, mountains, old railroad sites, and public lands you'd probably never recognize on your own from a timetable. For rail fans, it's a really nice crossover. You still get to do your usual thing, watch signals, meets, curves, but you also pick up the context of the land the railroad is crossing, from national forests to park units that sit within sight of the tracks. The catch is that Trails and Rails isn't on every departure, and the schedule can change seasonally. So you'll want to check the current National Park Service Trails and Rails listings or Amtrak's information to see if your Coast Starlight date lines up with a guided segment. If you can time it, it turns a regular travel day into a sort of rolling ranger talk, no extra ticket, no bus transfer, and someone explaining the story behind the scenery you came here to see. You don't have to build a whole Crater Lake side trip to get extra value out of the Coast Starlight. Up and down the line, there are smaller step-off opportunities that turn a simple train ride into a bigger West Coast rail adventure. At the north end, Seattle and Portland give you easy access to classic Pacific Northwest scenery. From either city you can tack on day trips to places like Mount Rainier or the Columbia River Gorge, which are popular add-ons in many rail and parks itineraries. Think waterfalls, volcanic peaks, and hiking without having to drive all the way up from California yourself. Up at the north end of the Coast Starlight, Seattle isn't just a big city terminus, it's your launchpad for Mount Rainier. There's no simple public bus that drops you at the park gate and back in a day. So for most visitors without a car, the realistic move is a small group tour. Several operators run full-day Rainier trips straight from downtown. You get picked up near your hotel or a central meeting point, then spend 10 up to 12 hours exploring viewpoints, waterfalls, and short trails in areas like Paradise or Sunrise, depending on the season, with transport and a guide included and some tours including breakfast or lunch as well. So, the play for rail fans is simple. Ride the Coast Starlight into Seattle. Give yourself at least one buffer day, and drop a Rainier tour into the middle of your itinerary. You keep the whole thing car-free. Train into the city, guided van into the park, back to your hotel, then on to your next leg by rail. Portland is another Coast Starlight stop that looks ordinary on the timetable but is huge for nature access, especially if you don't want to rent a car. The Columbia River Gorge is set up with car-free options in mind, and that's a gift if you're building a rail-anchored trip. From downtown Portland, you can book half-day or full-day tours that hit multiple gorge waterfalls: Multnomah, Latourell, Horsedale, Vista House, and sometimes even loop out toward Mount Hood. These tours include round-trip transport, a guide, and a series of scenic stops, with prices typically in the moderate day trip from the city range. For a Coast Starlight rider, that means you can step off in Portland, spend a night or two, and plug in a gorge day with nothing more complicated than being at the pickup point on time. No rental car, no worrying about parking on narrow scenic roads. Just a rail-to-waterfalls connection that gives you a totally different landscape than what you saw from the train window. Farther south, you've got coastal stops like Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. Santa Barbara is perfect if you want a rail-to-beach escape or even a wildlife or whale-watching cruise. And San Luis Obispo puts you within easy reach of Central Coast wine country and rolling hills that feel very California postcard. Santa Barbara in particular is where the Coast Starlight meets the kind of coastline most people associate with road trips, not rail. From the harbor, operators run 2 or 3 hour cruises that focus on whale watching in season. Gray whales in winter and spring, plus chances for dolphins, sea lions, and other marine life. Outside peak whale season, many of the same boats switch to coastal and sunset cruises. But the idea is the same. You're out on the water with commentary, views back toward the coastline, and wildlife if it cooperates. So imagine this as part of your Coast Starlight plan. You roll into Santa Barbara by train, drop your bag at a hotel within walking distance of the waterfront, then walk down to the harbor for an afternoon whale watch or a sunset cruise. It's one of the easiest ways to add a completely different kind of big scenery to a rail trip. Mountains and cliffs from the train, open ocean and wildlife from the boat. The Coast Starlight is famous for views and for delays. In recent years, it's averaged roughly an hour late, and 1 or even 2 hour delays are common enough that rail fans jokingly call it the Starlate, so don't plan tight same-day connections. For any big add-on, Crater Lake, Mount Rainier, Columbia River Gorge, whale watching. Give yourself at least one overnight cushion between when the train is supposed to arrive and when your tour leaves. Always double-check the current timetable and live train status. And remember, if you step off the Coast Starlight and rejoin it on a later day, you're buying separate tickets for each leg, so build that into your plan from the start. If the main episode in this series helped you decide you're a coast person, this video is about what comes next, using the Coast Starlight as more than just a scenic ride and turning it into the backbone of a national park and nature trip up and down the West Coast. In the next episodes, I'll do the same thing for the Rockies and the desert, taking the California Zephyr and the Southwest Chief, and showing you the national parks and wild places they unlock once you step off the train. If you enjoyed this, hit like so YouTube shows it to more rail fans. And subscribe to Kane on the Rails for the Rockies and Desert Train to the Parks episodes coming up next.